Hello, welcome back to the Basketball Soapbox. I'm your host, Daniel Daly. As we continue with our questions for each team in the NBA, we move on to the Motor City, the Detroit Pistons. The Detroit Pistons had a crazy last year with Monty Williams as the coach, had Troy Weaver as the GM. Um, and it was a clusterfuck to say the least, right? You had the whole Jaden Ivey in the doghouse. You had Killian Hayes being a starter. You had Marvin Bagley playing. You had Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren both on the court at the same time. Monty Williams really just not having the energy for the team, and which was a question mark, right? Because the question of him getting hired with Detroit was, we just saw what happened with him and DeAndre Ayton and a young team that he burned out on and really showed back to his old days, even all the way back with, I believe, with Chris Paul and the New Orleans Hornets back in early their days. They bumped heads at times. And it's just like he's not a youth movement type of coach. And it just rubbed the people the wrong way there. And he was the highest paid coach, and they let him go after 1 year. So Detroit finally cleaned house, brought in Traden Langdon, I believe, to be the president of operations there. He had some time in with the San Antonio Spurs as a scout, was in Brooklyn, came to the Pelicans. He was the GM there for a little bit. Now he is with the Detroit Pistons. So the Detroit Pistons are doing a full overhaul, brought in some vets, which leads me to my question. Do the Detroit Pistons make a push for the play-in, or do they flip their vets at the deadline? And I've been very bullish on the Detroit Pistons for a long time because I like the draft picks they have had. Asura Thompson, Jaden Ivey, Cade Cunningham, Jalen Duren. That's their core. That's a pretty good core. They just drafted Ron Holland. And just looking at that team for the past couple of years, I was like, they can make a play and push if everything goes right. And I love the parts of this team. And it's just up for a coach and a GM to put all the right parts. Now they have brought in back Tobias Harris, who was here, who was there in Detroit a couple years ago, back after being ran out of Philly. Philly couldn't stand him, so maybe he can find some footing back with the Detroit Pistons. Brought in Malik Beasley, which was a nice touch. I thought that was a nice touch for them to do that. As well as there's another person, Tim Hardaway Jr. So they're trying to add some shooting around Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey and this team just to make it a little bit more feasible for Cade Cunningham to operate on the court because he was taking a lot of tough shots in his first couple of years. He's been through a bunch of head coaches. And it's just been one thing after another for the Detroit Pistons. And this team has not been the same. Even when they brought Blake Griffin in for a couple of years, they got to the playoffs with him. So there was that. But after that, it has not been smooth sailing for the Detroit Pistons since they had those guys like Chauncey Billups and Rip Hamilton. That's all the way back in 2008. Ronnie Stuckey, Rasheed Wallace, et cetera, et cetera. So the Detroit Pistons have been trying to find a direction for a long time and have been just knocking their head off the wall. You know, there was the Greg Monroe days. There was the Andre Drummond, Josh Smith, Charlie Venezuela. It just hasn't been good for them. They had Brandon Jennings at one point as well. So it just hasn't been good for the Detroit Pistons, but they do have a collection of youth and talent here. They have a new coach, JB Bickerstaff, who was out of the Cleveland Cavaliers there, got fired as the Cleveland Cavaliers coach, and they brought in Kenny Atkinson. But to see what JB Bickerstaff was able to do with that roster, even before they got Donovan Mitchell, was pretty good. So hopefully he can help keep developing this team and keep moving in the right direction because this team has a lot of young talent. And Detroit is a great basketball city. I know they moved from the Palace and stuff like that, but they've been a part of NBA history for a long time and have always been knocking on the door. So to see them out of the loop for so long, hopefully there's better days ahead, especially with JB Bickerstaff coming in. Maybe a little bit more understanding of how to develop these young guys. They actually have a GM and president who looks like he has an idea of a plan of where they're going and what they're trying to do to spend some money and try to develop and try to keep building. Hopefully they can keep moving in the right direction with that. And hopefully this is a move in the right direction. and they just don't keep spinning the wheel here. And they should be in the play-in race. There's no reason for them not to. They have a bunch of young talent, and the best way to develop talent is to play more games, get into the playoffs, get that experience. We just saw that with Orlando, how they built their team up for years and finally got to the playoffs. Hopefully something can click here for the Detroit Pistons. That would be my question for the Detroit Pistons. Next up, we'll be going to Indiana, last year's Eastern Conference runner-up. So stay tuned. Thank you.